Good day to all the viewers at home and welcome to a new thing brought to you by the Global Business Roundtable. My name is Sipho Mseleku, the convener of the Global Business Roundtable and your host for today. The Global Business Roundtable, also known as GBR, is a Christ-centered organization. GBR is multi-denominational, multicultural and multiracial organization, focusing on the holistic development of its members in line with God's purpose for their lives. GBR focuses on the kingship of Christ and not only on the priesthood of Christ. It encourages its members not only to influence and take over the spiritual mountain, but also other sectors of society, such as education, economy and finance, science and technology, sports, arts and culture, politics and governance, and also deals with family and societal issues. The name of the show is taken from the book of Isaiah 43, verse 18 to 19. Forget the former things. Do not dwell in the past. See, I am doing a new thing. It springs forth. Do you not perceive it? Today we are discussing the topic of Africa opportunities and challenges and discussing the continent of Africa. And I will introduce my panelists now. And starting on my left, we have His Excellency Honorable Gideon Dhlamini. He's the Member of Parliament in Swaziland and the former Minister of Trade and Industry and Commerce in Swaziland. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
On my extreme right, I have His Excellency Mr. Victor Kgomoesoane. He's the author of Africa is Open for Business. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
And he's also a commentator and a writer in the media, Power FM here in South Africa, and also write in Sunday Independent. On my immediate right, I have Miss Matlou. She's a director of African Diaspora Foundation. Welcome, madam. Thank you very much. I'm now going to give you a minute each to just introduce yourself slightly in more details, just telling us about who you are, your highlights of your career, the things you are doing, and I think whatever you think will be relevant for the viewers to get to know you better. Let me start with you, Honorable Minister Dhlamini.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, the convener. I bring greetings first and foremost from the Kingdom of Swaziland with my wife, Lindy, who has accompanied me to the show, to this TV recording. My name, as has been already been said, I'm Gideon Dhlamini, actually Reverend Gideon Dhlamini. I'm a pastor with the church, Kgomoesoane Zion Church in Swaziland, in Manzini. I'm also a businessman. I'm also a member of parliament and, as already been said, former Minister of Trade and Industry in Swaziland. And basically speaking, that is who I am, and I've spent almost all the past 30 years of my life in the consulting and training industry business. And I'm also a former General Secretary of the Council of Swaziland Churches. Otherwise, I have a long CV, but let me end there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Honorable Minister. Your Excellency.
Good day. My name is Boshigo Matlou. I'm heading for 67 years this year, so I've been around quite some time. I left South Africa in 1961 to go into exile with my parents, who were in the ANC. As a result, I have lived on the continent of Africa, starting from Botswana, Tanzania, Nigeria, Ghana. I worked for Radio Ghana, Radio Nigeria. I worked for United Bank of Africa in Nigeria for 10 years. I then came back to South Africa and worked for the International Labour Organization in areas of child labor, gender, programming, in a variety of areas. I am now a member of the Winners Chapel International in Pretoria. I'm the chair of the board. I'm also executive director of the African Diaspora Foundation, trying to get Africa to engage with our people who are in foreign lands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your vast experience in the continent. I'm sure that will come in handy for the discussions we're going to have. Your Excellency, Mr. Victor.
Thank you. Good day. My name is Victor Kgomoesoane. I'm a storyteller, you can say that. Africa is my passion, and I make it my business to inform people about what the continent has to offer. I just grew tired of it being called the Dark Continent, so I decided if anything is going to tell a different story, it has to be our efforts, and I decided to start writing about it, start broadcasting about it, start advising businesses about it. So my calling, I believe, is to help Africa become what it could be, make my contribution, however little way I can. And for a living, I do a lot of radio work. I write for newspapers, I present on television, and I consult for anybody who cares to hear about what Africa has to offer, be they business, governments, or individuals. So let's see what Africa can do, but I still believe it's open for business.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll touch upon your book because I read your book. It's very, very beautiful. It really opens up opportunities and eyes of many people who do not know what their own continent has and the world. I think I would definitely recommend it that everybody buys and read that book. I think we'll start with our questions to get straight to it about what is your view on the current state of Africa? Where do you see things going? And in terms of economic, socio-political direction. And I think that's very, very important. What are the threats that underpin the development of Africa? And whether they are political or economic, what are the obstacles? And how are those obstacles, how can they be overcome? And what are the opportunities that most of the time we do not speak about? What has been the role of colonization in the state of Africa today? And we know that many countries have been victims, one way or another, of all forms of oppression, whether colonization, apartheid, or slave trade. What's the legacy of that over the mindsets of the African people and even the people of African descent that reside in the diaspora? Who wants to start? Minister, do you want to start?
Thank you so much. I think Africa is in business and not just ready for business, more so because we have come a long way as Africa in terms of securing our political independence. And almost all the states, the country independent states of Africa, I think about 54 of them, are now independent politically. And I think the thing now is to pursue the economic and social independence, and which is why I'm very happy to note that African leaders have come together, supported by the African people, to say let's throw an agenda 2063 that will drive Africa and create an Africa that will show prosperity and flourish for all Africans. And as well, I'm aware that Africa has now agreed actually to come together and liberalize the borders in trade, in social and services, merchandise, and every other aspect of the interrelationships between the African people. So in that respect, I think we are on a right footing. It takes a long time to foster change. It's not something that you can achieve overnight. As a Christian, for example, I know how long it has taken to Christianize the world, and we're still Christianizing the world. So from the colonial era to where we are today, I think we are ready. It's almost on your marks, get set, go for Africa, ready to go to the promised land Africa that was meant for, because we are a very rich continent, especially in our mineral resources. And of late, if you look at the human resource figures, they are very good. And of course, we're even exporting some of the human resource expertise in Africa. So by and large, my take is that, of course, being from a colonial era, having been oppressed for such a long time, one cannot overlook the fact that the current generation, a lot of it is actually from the colonial era, and they think more like colonized people, if you want to ask me, including the systems that are meant to be driving the agenda for Africa. But it's a generational issue. I think that as new generations come into play, once, as I correctly pointed out, the current a generation of leaders has put in place the roadmap. And I think that it is time for our education systems to start being integrated, transformed, so that they talk the African agenda.
Yeah.
And I'm actually very excited, lastly, that with the advent of GBR coming into play, knowing as a Christian how the Holy Spirit can actually influence and change things, and it knows no borders, it knows no race. So through it, I believe that Africa will be transformed, and I wouldn't encourage us to dwell much on the problems of Africa, but focus on the vision and the opportunities that we have. Of course, we have to know the problems, but I think let's not dwell on those.
Also, we've seen political liberation, but we're still lagging behind in economic liberation. This seems to elude us. Virtually all the nations in Africa are still having this backlog of transforming their economy, and economy being controlled and owned by the people of African descent. Who wants to come in here? Should I start?
I can say,
You can.
You know, you mentioned the legacy of colonization. Let's start with the borders of Africa.
Yes.
That they are not African creations, right?
Yes.
They are the products of the Berlin Conference, where colonial powers met and decided how they're going to slice Africa amongst themselves. So one of the most enduring legacies would be Africans failing to transcend those borders and continue to want to operate within them. And in so doing, deprive the continent of the opportunity of regional integration. Because if you look at some economies are larger, Nigeria is big enough, you can almost say it can fend for itself.
Yes.
It's got a market of over 100 million people. It's got resources, it's got skills, it's got that. But there are some countries that don't have that, but they have resources. Some have a large population but no resources. Some have a smaller population.
But resources.
But eventually, I believe, if Africans could understand that the borders that divide us are not ours to uphold and start collaborating a whole lot more. What am I talking about? You saw in West Africa when the president of the Gambia, former, wanted to cling to power, that the minute the economic community of West African states stepped up and said, no, you're not going to do that, there was a solution.
Yes.
But it's when they operated as a unit.
A unit together.
And I really dread the fact that we still, after so many years, continue to operate about that. Luckily, there's the information technology, which tends to transcend borders. And I think that's one of the trends that have liberated us a bit, because it allows us to share information across political borders, across cultural borders. And that might be the one thing that has to...
Why don't our heads of states who are in control in this nation break these borders?
Well, they are not in control. That's what it tells you.
The African Union, the regional blocs, what are they doing about these borders?
Yeah, but that's my point. I'm saying, remember what Kwame Nkrumah said in his book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. He said, the effects of neocolonialism are such that they give you the impression of sovereignty when you are not sovereign.
Yeah.
So if you just look at how the African Union, the headquarters was built by another country, which is not an African, you will ask yourself, what was the African Union doing? Failing to build its own home. Headquarters.
Yes,
So the symbolic value of that is just wrong, that we are out here with all our resources and yet we are not able to get our act together. And just lastly, maybe just to give the others a chance, the fact that you saw President Trump coming into office and saying America first, and yet we have resources here that we refuse to beneficiate on a significant scale. There are instances, Ghana is starting to beneficiate cocoa, a bit of beneficiation in Botswana, but they were outsmarted by the Indians when they tried. So the essence of not being able to add value to the very resources that we send abroad, and they come back to us at 20 times the value of what we exported, and we don't see anything wrong with it.
So it's a mindset. I think we need to deal with that. And when you come back, I would like you to try and answer the question as to whether is it right for Africans to expect change from the top, or can change be driven from the bottom by people themselves? Maybe it's people that can break these borders, not the heads of states. Your Excellency.
I was just thinking that a lot of people are annoyed at the pronouncements that Donald Trump makes. But I'm excited because I'm thinking Africa's resources, mental resources that are in America, will begin to come back home to develop the continent. From the 60s, I remember when I first got onto the continent. In Ghana and in Nigeria, Americans used to come and they would pick the best brains in sixth form. Those who are about to go into university. Those people are now in NASA. No one tells the continent that that's where we have our Africa's best brains. Scientists, doctors, you go out there, the best, especially in Nigeria. I remember in the 70s as well, Nigeria's mental resources going to the Middle East. Doctors, pilots. What is it that is driving our people away from the continent to go and serve other people outside? We've got to begin to address the problems of environment. What is it that makes the environment so unwelcoming for our own people? Why do our people want to go outside? Our people are dying across the Mediterranean Sea because they're looking for greener pastures. Whereas here's a continent full of resources, a continent that is the youngest development-wise. We've got the youngest young people in Africa more than any other continent. We've got to harness these resources. We've got to educate. We've got to make it possible for people to want to stay home so that they can develop the continent.
Is there a problem because of leadership that we find ourselves having so much resources in terms of people, in terms of energy resources, mineral resources, etc., but we can't harness, we can't work as a collective and take advantage of what we have? If we put Africa first, what would happen? And it's just amazing. Your Excellency, can you come in here?
Yes, perhaps you could be right to say it's a leadership issue, because leadership viewed holistically, it also involves the people, the citizens. So, but leadership is a function of the citizens of Africa. So when you point fingers at the leadership, whether it's a president, is a minister, or is a king, you're actually pointing at African people, because they produce these leaders. So if nothing moves, of course we can point at the leaders, but we need to focus again, how do we create the capacity now within the people? For example, like I've already stated, our political leaders have done a marvelous job putting us to where we are and actually signing all these agreements of integrating Africa for a greater future. But yes, that political level. Now, what we need now is the level where we need to deal with the systems and the human resource that actually delivers on these things and systems and transform those. Because if our bureaucracies in our respective governments and everywhere else in the offices have not been transformed and aligned to the new vision, then you will not see a change. And also, if our systems and our approach is not systemic, if you is not following a system to say we have to move from point A to point B because that will give an effect to this outcome, then we will have a problem. So I'm thinking that we now need to work on our people, on our administration systems, transform them so that they are the vehicle that will deliver. Once our leaders have done what they do, then we can do the rest if we are properly capacitated. I think that's why I was emphasizing on our education systems, that they need to be aligned so that we produce a new breed of civil servants, for example, a new breed of industrial workers and everywhere, and of educationists, etc., etc. So mine is to say, I think leaders have done their job, but they can also facilitate how then to develop the tools to deliver on the mandate of Africa.
We've got regional integration, the regional bodies. And also we have the African Union. They've been talking integration for many years, but we're not feeling it on the ground. It's been on the agenda for many years. I once was a CEO of the Association of SADC Chambers, and I've attended many of the heads of state meetings where they talk about regional integration. The agenda is the same every year, but nothing happens on the ground. Why is it? There's a disconnect between the wishes and the reality on the ground.
The disconnect might even be between the leadership, as in political leadership, and the business leadership.
Yes.
I often see Chinese trade missions when they travel. They travel with the political leaders, but they travel with the engineers, with the business people, with the accountants. So when they close the deal and say, we have this deal to do 1, 2, 3, the business people solidify it in real contracts. I find that often with our African discussions, when they do happen, they end up at the ceremonial level. The minute you sign the cameras are clicking, okay, we have an agreement, we have a deal. It tends to take a little longer than it should for the real people to come. In fact, I've seen business leaders who don't consider economic diplomacy part of their strategic matrix. They don't invest in understanding how governments work. They don't invest in knowing the priorities of the very countries where they operate. They still see themselves as business leaders, not citizens of the country. And that, I believe, is a disconnection. And that's why perhaps you see the revolutions, the fees must fall, because the young people who don't have the baggage of office, of position, look for answers. And when they don't get them, they use the information at their disposal to make remember what Kgomoesoane said about the end of the nation state. He said there are going to be 4 things that will drive development: information, individual investment, and infrastructure. These 4 things don't belong to any political leader. And they don't know political borders. So we either find a way of integrating between business leadership and political leaderships, different African countries, or we will be driven by people with access to info, people with the investment power and muscle, people with the infrastructure or the ability to control the infrastructure, and individual interests. And woe is Africa if those individual interests happen to be non-African. And as we speak, there are.
You've spoken so succinctly and correctly. You know, I've been in chambers of commerce most part of my life. Here in South Africa is the CEO of NAFCOC and CHAMSA and the SADC region, but also I was the president of the Continental Chamber of Commerce. Same thing, we lobbied many times with heads of states to allow business people to sit in their summits so that they can, you know, transform, convert the discussions and go and implement in their nations. They don't.
Yeah, but business leaders aren't sincere also, Mseleku.
Yes.
They're not always sincere. Because in business, it's very easy to talk against corruption.
Yes.
If it's somebody else doing it. And often, there are leaders who know exactly what you would have been lobbying for, but they wanted to do it on an individual basis.
Yes,
what we now colloquially in South Africa call state capture.
Yes.
Where you want to use your individual muscle as an investor or owner of capital to influence political decisions.
Here we're speaking about business associations, not individual business people that have their own selfish agendas, but people who speak for the industry. And I think they need to have a platform to influence these discussions. Let's look into the challenges of politics, challenges of leadership, because the leaders influence the people who follow them. And they set up policies, they put legislation, they can truly change the lives of people, whether by creating job opportunities, whether like by creating business environment for businesses to flourish so that jobs can be created and poverty eradicated. And so what's wrong? Why do we have so many coups, so many elections rigged? And how can this be addressed? How do we set up a right political environment that will ensure that the rest comes in, the business people flourish, that the economy flourish? Is the democracy in Africa working? And is there something wrong with African leadership, or is the system in which they come in and operate that define how they behave? Do you want to come in here? And of course, we have to come in on the role of Christianity in the continent. What role can it play to ensure that we have the right kind of leaders?
Yes,
you want to start?
Yes, it's
Your
quite an
Excellency.
interesting general statement, but it is true because it has aspects of being true. And I do again want to say leadership is a function of the people, and that a lot of the time we see leaders who will cling to power and sometimes want to extend terms of office beyond the constitutional provisions. And you find their followers saying, yes, go on and renew, and to show that the leader is not alone. But again, we also have serious issues of corruption, where some leaders may fear that, hey, if I get out of this chair, I will probably be jailed. And in order not to go to jail, I have to cling on to power until I can be sure I'm safe. But having said that, I think we have come a long way, like I said, in terms of the political emancipation. But we have these basic needs that Africans have in terms of issues of poverty, poor health services, etc., and that perhaps those are the things that seem to rule the way that we're going, even in terms of completely disentangling us away from our colonial ties. Because even as you correctly put it, that we have been talking about regional integration, but it's not taking place. It's simply because a lot of the countries still have very strong ties again with their, I don't want to say colonial masters, but our former colonial people, they still have very strong ties, and they have bilateral strong agreements that sometimes militate against the regional integration or continental integration. But we as Africans, again, I think that we have to, maybe even through technology, like His Excellency has said, through the communication and information technology, liberate that space so that we know more about one another, we can synergize, and together we can even improve on intra-continental trade so that we can trade more and know one another better. Currently, we know more about overseas countries than we know about even about our own neighbors. We watch more of the televisions of other countries than we watch ours, because again we have interesting laws that seems to prohibit one national TV or radio, whatever station, from broadcasting into another country because of the distrust that has been planted on us by the colonial era. So like I say, it's really a generational issue. I think we need to face these challenges. And like my colleague has said, business has to play its part in terms of empowering the people. And again, like I said, we need to also capitalize on our Christian and other social formations and strengths. I've seen that other faiths have actually, if you wish, capitalized on their faith, integrated it with the politics, with the business, with the economy, social, etc. And they've synergized with us Christians. We seem to have divorced the two. And like I have always said, that the advent of GPR, I pray that it really succeeds along its mandate so that we can really exploit this kingship aspect of the Christian faith. And I think because it cuts across
all sectors.
Yes, all sectors, and that is a great opportunity.
I think there's a role that Christians can play, or the kingdom-minded people with the true good heart to do what is right, to occupy every mountain, in politics, in business, in education, so that the right policies are put in place. And we've left everything to the secular world, and that's why we're complaining today. Your Excellency.
Maybe we begin to send missionaries the way Christianity came to Africa. Let's send Africans across the continent to interact with other Africans in different countries. That way to get to know each other, because, well, I have lived on the continent, so I can easily interact. But I still see that people still have this thing of, you are from this place, you are from that place, and there's still this trust among ourselves. Maybe the Christian missionary way is the way to go, that we can begin to, like he said, work from the ground, begin to engage with the people, you know, communities, to engage with one another and even I was thinking of how we could even use Steve Biko's Black Consciousness for the African to get to know who you are as a person, what this continent means to you as a home, so that you are proud of yourself. Wherever you are, you can walk with your head held high, instead of this business, like I was saying, going across the Mediterranean and being treated like nothings, and people are dying in large numbers. Then you keep on asking yourself, what is it about the African that we are so ready to go off to other lands to even go and become slaves all over again there? Slavery has taken place already on the continent. You know, millions of our people died, over 100 million people died across the Atlantic going into slavery. Why are we now doing it ourselves? It's because there is something that is driving us away from our continent. Our leaders have actually, the way I see it, leaders have reneged on their duty as leaders on this continent.
And the question is, what has been our leaders' response to people dying in the Mediterranean?
It's never, you never hear anything about it. If anything, you hear CNN, you hear Al Jazeera, you hear BBC. The African continent is not addressing that. It's very silent about it. Why?
Your Excellency, maybe you can come in here.
Well, African leaders can't respond to that decisively, because the reason people are migrating is because of poor leadership where they are coming from. Who would run away from home and risk crossing the Mediterranean on a rickety boat if they have something to run away from? So perhaps the question is, does it make us feel ashamed enough to do something? And there I agree with His Excellency, that leadership is not just who's in office. Leadership is all of us.
Yes.
Do we care enough that if we are seated here and we are able to go out and dine and spend money and somebody else is struggling on the streets, is it our business? Because being African doesn't mean calling yourself African and carrying an African name. It means acting African. And if Africans care for one another, if Africans are about you are, I am, Ubuntu, then we should show that even in how we don't just look the other way. At the moment, we look the other way. Xenophobic or Afrophobic attacks happen in South Africa, we look the other way. Life goes on. In fact, we find an explanation for why somebody can be put satellite. I mean, what good human reason can be there for somebody to be satellite when there's no reason whatsoever? But we found people explaining it. So that is the essence of it. But if you talk about democracy, I don't know much about democracy. I just know that ordinary people don't want to run countries. They don't even want to run companies. They want a decent life for their children.
Exactly.
They want to create it. That's what Amilcar Cabral said. He said, don't be fooled when people follow you politically and think they are attracted by your ideals. They want a simple life for their children. They want to secure it. The minute you threaten that, it doesn't matter whether you have a democracy or a dictatorship. The minute you threaten the very well-being of an individual and on a large enough scale, you have an uprising.
Yes.
And that's where the way to make sure that your government, your system holds, is to make sure that it services and meets the needs
of the people,
of the majority of the people. Marx said it, that any system that fails to provide for its majority carries in itself a seed of explosion. So there's no way you can sustain any system, whatever you call it. But yes, we need democracy because we need people to decide their fate. But I've seen countries that are not democracies, or not by definition, like Rwanda. Rwanda is not a typical democracy as you know, but it's very prosperous because it has a leader who dictates in the right direction, in the interests of the majority of the people.
Yes,
So I wouldn't be able to risk an opinion on whether democracy works or it doesn't. Because I think people want to know, when I get out, is the street clean?
Yes.
If I pay a tax for you to clean the street, just
used?
do it. If I go to a hospital because you said I have a hospital, public hospital, let it work, let it have facilities.
Exactly.
The minute on a large scale people get disillusioned, your system crumbles.
No, that's true. But I think there's a point that you've said, that leadership is not only those people in political office. All of us are leaders. We've got a role to play. We need to take responsibility for contributing to the betterment of our environment, of our world. For instance, on the issues of borders, you know, the Global Business Roundtable, we're in more than 70 countries now, 40 in Africa, and we've managed to breach the borders. People are trading and are doing businesses. Everywhere you get into an exporter, you'll hear somebody saying, Your Excellency, you know, he's a GBR member. And we're doing business across. Yes. More than 40 nations in Africa, 70 outside of Africa, in Europe, in the US, in North America, South America, Middle East. This is very, very important. In other words, people from the ground, it's ground up, and we are in every township, suburb, village, in other places, because we believe that it's when you provide services. This show is broadcast to many nations, and from June it will be broadcast in French-speaking nations, because we're bridging that gap again from Francophone, Anglophone, Lusophone, and we're able to communicate because the colonizers, you know, broke that chain of us trusting each other, ensure that there's mistrust amongst Africans. So these are the things that we really need to deal with and take collective responsibility. The leaders in politics will play their role, but we have to play our role in ensuring that we contribute to the solutions of the world. Why is Africa intra-trade so minimal? And why is Africa not trading with itself? If we can touch also about the billions of dollars that leave the continent annually due to illicit financial flows. And what happened to African Renaissance, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and the vision of uniting the continent. What happened to that vision? Are we closer to that ideal? The role of China in Africa, what do you think is its agenda? And then you can close. And I'm sure we'll not be able to cover all these key points, but whatever we can touch, it's okay. Where do we start? Should we start with you, Your Excellency?
Thank you, Excellency. Yes, you are correct. It's an interesting situation that we are not trading as much with ourselves. Actually, we are almost the least. The last time I checked, in terms of the ECA report, we are almost 14 to 15% of intra-trade of the total trade, and about 86 to 85. It's actually with the outside continents. And actually, even amongst that, we are actually exporting raw materials and importing finished goods and services, if you wish. So in short, we are not consuming what we produce. We consume what has been produced by others in other continents around the world. So for that is why I am saying the agenda that we've embarked on 2063 as well as the Continental Free Trade Area Agreements are a very good foundation. Of course, it's been a long time since these things have been spoken about, but I'm optimistic that where we are today is the best way to start moving forward, and I think the opportunities are high, especially with the advent of information technology. If we can exploit that and also just liberalize our borders so that even at the local level we need to know the next person, your neighbor. Currently we have serious non-tariff barriers which are just about trust and knowing each other, just moving here, crossing a border from where we are, you have, let alone trade. You find trucks queuing at our borders because we don't trust what they are carrying, and there are no systems in place. So it becomes even easier to ship your goods overseas than to sell to your neighboring country.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think we need to deal with those systems decisively, and that is where our leaders can actually assist by putting pressure to make sure that our systems, administrative systems, are liberalized so that we can, because if we grow at the local level, then at regional level, then we can influence the continent.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can't start from the top down. We have to start and grow upward. So in that way, I think we have an opportunity there that can assist us to integrate and start trading amongst ourselves, buying goods from one another, our people getting jobs, because we're currently creating jobs for the overseas countries, and that is unfortunate. And I think we have a huge opportunity, and I'm happy that actually industrialization and beneficiation of our raw materials have been prioritized under every aspect of our agenda for development in Africa, which is why I'm very optimistic. We're not there yet, but as a Christian,
we will definitely get there.
Faith.
We have to
I'm
be
confident
optimistic.
we'll get there.
Yeah.
Let's be directed
Optimistic.
by the vision rather than our problems.
I agree. Thank you, Excellency. Let's hear you, Your Excellency.
My worry is Africa keeps on coming up with programs like this 2063. We had the Century of the African. Thabo Mbeki was, championing it. But was it a one-man show or was it a continental thing? The minute the man left, we don't hear about it anymore. There was NEPAD. We thought, here is a program that's going to help with economic development of the continent. Nobody hears about NEPAD anymore.
African Renaissance.
Yes, headquarters somewhere in Midrand is just an office. Nothing is happening there. How many of these programs are we going to come up with? I mean, during the times of Kwame Nkrumah and Nyerere, and it was a crop of leaders who had a vision for the continent. But amongst the leaders of the continent themselves, they sabotage each other because others, there is the Francophones this side, there is the Anglophones this side. And like we said, the bilaterals with the former colonizers, instead of Africans coming together and saying our destiny is in togetherness, in us being one continent, one people, we are taking too long about it. This thing of having to go from one generation to the other with hope and with faith, but nothing really showing, it's getting to be too much. It's about time that we come up with programs and we implement them. We have regional organizations, this regional economic, we only hear about ECOWAS, and we only heard about ECOWAS only when it was time to remove the man in the Gambia from power. But apart from that, what economic developments have taken place? It's been 3 centuries already since industrialization came into place in Europe. When is Africa going to start to industrialize so that we can create jobs for the young people, so that we can begin to use our raw materials to produce finished goods and then export finished goods instead of exporting Africa's minerals to enrich other people. And then we buy them back 10 times the price. And then the resources of Africa, the money that leaves this continent, who is allowing it to go? We ourselves are playing a part in it. When are we going to realize that the continent needs us to keep our resources here for the development of our own people?
Good question. I think we need to start answering those questions frankly and come up with the programs. We've got visions, we've got good programs, but we don't implement. That's the key point that comes from you.
It might be exactly the point that backlog is an opportunity. That's one of the points I make in the book. One of the points I make in the book. If I just mention 2 or 3 names of people who saw a backlog and converted it into an opportunity, you get a James Mwangi coming out of Kenya,
yes,
who saw the lack of banking in many countries, and he built his equity bank, which was an equivalent of what in South Africa you can call a stokvel or a collective savings scheme. Equity bank is among the largest, if not the largest.
It is the largest in
Africa, according to a number of accounts.
Yes.
A man like Aliko Dangote, who sees the infrastructure backlog and he uses his muscle to invest in countries that we don't even talk about. He's building refineries in Nigeria, he's building cement factories in Ethiopia, in Zambia. So there are people who are showing, and you even meet non-Africans already. There's a man called Chad Larson in Kenya who develops prepaid kind of solar energy that he sells to people. I spoke to another one 2 weeks ago, I forget his name. But there are young people, not so young people, who are seeing this backlog as an opportunity. So perhaps all the things that we are seeing as a challenge, including the poor regional intra-Africa trade, should be an opportunity for Africans who speak many languages to start leading missions between countries that are neighbors but don't trade as much, to start fostering outside or within the framework of the regional economic blocks and see how far we can take that. But yeah, we should be guided by that. So when we see a backlog, let's see it as an opportunity to build as well.
Now, your 1 minute parting shot. Oh, it's time to round up. Let me give you half a minute to just give your final advice.
Yes, thank you so much, Your Excellency. My final message actually relates to one thing that is not well spoken about, and that is to say one thing that Africa is lacking is this thing of figures. We don't count ourselves, we don't count our economy, we don't describe ourselves, define ourselves. And I think the moment we start as Africa to use evidence as a way of governing, managing, so that we're evidence-based, so that even when we campaign in our elections, we can say, so many people were poor, I will reduce this figure to this figure. There was 60%, I want to reduce it to 20%. And we get this governance thing across even from the continental level. You visit the website of the AU, you hardly find any statistics about Africa. You actually have to go to other websites to find statistics about ourselves. You go to the regional bodies, the tripartite, there is no statistics on trade, there is no statistics on almost anything. So we don't know ourselves, and I'm encouraging that if our countries and our regional bodies, the continent, can prioritize this evidence-based way of governing our countries and our people, so that we can talk from an evidence-based perspective, so we can know whether we're progressing, stagnant, or still where we are. So I think that will answer a lot of questions, and which areas are progressing. And let's not allow people to count us. Let's count ourselves.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very good closing statement, because we really, really need to know who we are, where we stand, and work on the information that's concrete, not on the information that people throw at us. Thank you very much for accepting our invite to come and participate in this program, and you've shared some insight, wisdom, and I'm sure the viewers at home have now a better perspective on Africa. We will invite you again, because this topic is huge. There are questions we did not even begin to touch because of the limitation on time. To you, the viewers at home, we thank you very much for tuning in. If you have questions or inputs or suggestions, check us on our website, www.globalbusinessroundtable.com, www.globalbusinessroundtable.com. You may also contact us by email at comments@anewthing.tv, comments@anewthing.tv. Remember at all times to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. All these things shall be added unto you. Matthew 6, verse 33. See you again next time, and God bless.